Sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones you never really see. Picture this. It's late. The rain hasn't stopped for hours. You're standing in the middle of your own home, surrounded by everything you've worked for. The walls you paid for, the laughter you raised inside them, the life you built with your bare hands. And yet, something feels wrong. The air is heavy, too still. There's a tension you can't explain. The faces around you don't look the same anymore. Maybe it starts small. A strange look, a half-truth, a question that never quite gets answered. You brush it off, because that's what love does. It believes, it trusts, it forgives. But then, one night, that trust snaps. A single moment, one discovery, and the life you thought was yours suddenly feels like a story someone else wrote. The kind of moment that makes your hands shake, your heartbeat echo in your ears, and your mind whisper, "This can't be happening," because how could it? How could everything you've known, everyone you've loved, be hiding something so dark right in front of you? Tonight's story isn't about strangers or criminals lurking in alleyways. It's about the kind of betrayal that happens in silence, in kitchens, bedrooms, and family dinners, where smiles hide secrets and loyalty wears a familiar face. So before we begin, ask yourself, what's worse, being lied to by an enemy, or discovering that the lie was built by someone who once said they'd never hurt you? You're about to find out. This is Crime Next Door. If you're drawn to stories that remind you how thin the line between love and deception really is, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this video. It helps us keep uncovering the truths that hide right next door. When you think of the perfect family, you probably picture something like this. A wide driveway leading up to a spotless mansion, tucked behind quiet Bel Air streets, expensive cars parked out front, the kind that purr instead of roar, windows that glow gold in the evening, the kind of light that makes you believe everything inside must be just as beautiful. That's the world of Michael Harrington. 57 years old, sharp-minded, sharp-dressed, the kind of man people point to and say, he figured life out. A tech investor who turned a single software idea into a small empire. He had it all: the money, the respect, the charm, and a family that looked straight out of a holiday commercial. His wife, Catherine, 52, elegant but warm, with that soft kind of grace that makes people feel at ease. Together, they had 3 children. Emma, 22, the firstborn, already carving her own path in business. Luke, 18, bright, athletic, always smiling. And little Sophie, 15, the quiet one, the one who'd rather stay up late painting than go out. From the outside looking in, the Harringtons were the kind of family people envied. Their Christmas cards were picture perfect. Vacations in Italy, charity galas in Los Angeles, weekend getaways to Aspen, all wrapped in love, success, and security. But behind every glossy photograph, there's always someone standing just out of focus. In the Harrington household, that someone was James Porter. Mid-50s, reserved but dependable. He'd been there since the early days, before the big contracts, before the private jets, Before the world learned Michael's name, James started as a driver, then a butler, then something more. The quiet constant in the background of every family memory. He wasn't just an employee, he was part of the rhythm of their lives. He was there when Michael worked late nights, bringing coffee without being asked. He was there when Catherine hosted her charity luncheons, always one step ahead, always knowing what she needed before she said it. He taught the kids to ride their bikes, to tie their ties, to say please and thank you. When Michael traveled, James filled the space with calm, with familiarity. And over time, he stopped being the butler. He became Uncle James, the man who fixed toys on Christmas Eve, who showed up for school recitals, who sat at the back of family dinners laughing quietly at inside jokes. He blended in so seamlessly that you almost forgot he was being paid to be there. To the kids, he was comfort. To Catherine, he was reliable. And to Michael, he was loyalty made flesh. Michael used to tell friends, James isn't just an employee, he's the brother I never had. They'd laugh about it sometimes. How James knew every code to the house, every detail of the family's routines. How he could anticipate Michael's schedule better than his own assistant. How Catherine trusted him enough to let him sign for deliveries, pick up the kids, and even hold spare keys to their vacation homes. In a world where trust is rare, Michael believed he'd found someone who'd earned it. And maybe that's what made the Harrington family feel so untouchable. Not the money or the mansion, but the comfort that comes from believing you're surrounded by people who would never hurt you. Because that's the thing about betrayal. It never comes from strangers. It comes from the people sitting at your dinner table. From the ones who know where you keep your spare key. The ones you'd hand your children to without thinking twice. And James Porter was one of those people. To anyone watching from the outside, the Harrington household was a model of love, discipline, and devotion. A family that laughed together, worked together, grew together. But as we've learned time and time again here on Crime Next Door, perfection has a way of hiding rot beneath the surface. You see, when a family looks that flawless, when everything seems too steady, too polished, there's usually something brewing quietly beneath it, something waiting for the right moment to break through the cracks. And in the Harrington home, those cracks were already forming. They started small. Little things no one noticed. Late-night conversations that lasted too long. Shared glances that lingered just a bit. Secrets that whispered louder than words. But nobody saw it. Not yet. Because when everything in your life looks perfect, you convince yourself it is. And for Michael Harrington, it would take just one discovery, one perfectly ordinary night, to shatter the illusion he'd built his life upon. Because in that house of luxury, beneath the chandeliers and spotless floors, a truth was quietly growing. One that would turn love into anger, loyalty into betrayal, and a father into something else entirely. Everything seemed perfect until the night that illusion cracked. Every story of betrayal begins quietly. There's no thunder, no warning, just small, almost invisible moments that slip through the cracks of everyday life. In the Harrington household, it started with good intentions. Catherine and James had always worked side by side. Charity events, dinner parties, board meetings, the two of them ran the house like clockwork. If Catherine needed a last-minute floral arrangement, James handled it. If Michael was out of town and a client called, James made sure the message reached her. Their teamwork was seamless, efficient, natural, and Michael saw it as a blessing. He used to joke about it with friends, how lucky he was to have a wife so organized and a butler who treated his family like his own. But that's how it begins, isn't it? The line between trust and dependency starts to blur until one day you realize you're not sure where it was drawn in the first place. With Michael traveling more than ever, Catherine and James grew closer. They spent long hours together, sometimes late into the night, going over schedules, donations, household renovations. They laughed about small things, inside jokes only they seemed to get. At first, it was harmless. Two people keeping a household running, doing what they had always done. But somewhere along the way, that comfort shifted into something heavier, something that didn't belong. James had always been kind to her, respectful, dependable, the kind of presence that made her feel safe. And after years of living under the shadow of her husband's success, that safety started to mean something more. He listened when Michael didn't. He noticed details, her favorite flowers, the way she liked her tea, the songs that calmed her nerves. And when she smiled at him, it wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was connection. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was timing. Maybe it was inevitable. But one quiet night, somewhere between duty and desire, a line was crossed. What began as comfort became habit, and that habit became a secret that would live inside the Harrington mansion for more than 15 years. Think about that for a second. 15 years, 15 Christmases, 15 birthdays, 15 anniversaries. Every celebration built on a lie that smiled right back at Michael across the dinner table. To the world, James remained the loyal butler. To Catherine, he was something she couldn't name. Maybe love, maybe escape. They thought they hid it well. The stolen glances, the lingering touches, the late-night whispers disguised as planning. But in every perfect picture, there's a shadow just outside the frame. James would pour wine at the dinner table, his hand steady, his expression calm. But if you looked closely, his eyes always found Catherine's. Just for a second. Long enough for her to know he was still there. And Michael? He never saw it. He didn't look for it. Because why would he? He trusted them, both of them, with his home, his children, his legacy. When he called from airports at midnight, Catherine would answer softly, her voice tired but sweet. "We miss you," she'd say. And in the background, maybe James was still in the kitchen, finishing up for the night. Maybe he heard those words too. Maybe he smiled. The truth is, betrayal doesn't always feel like a dagger. Sometimes it feels like warmth, like being seen for the first time in years. And that's what made this so dangerous. Catherine didn't fall in love in a burst of passion. She drifted into it, slowly, quietly, like someone walking into deep water without realizing how far they've gone. By the time she understood what she'd done, it was already too late to turn back. She and James had crossed into a space where guilt and affection coexisted. They knew what they were doing was wrong, but the comfort of it kept them anchored. And every time they promised it would end, it didn't. Because the longer a secret lives, the harder it is to kill. Over time, that secret began weaving itself into the family's rhythm. The late nights, the shared tasks, the private smiles, it all became part of the daily routine. And soon enough, even the children saw James not as an employee, but as something closer to home. He was at every recital, every family barbecue, every moment that mattered. He held the camera while Michael posed with his kids, documenting memories he helped create but could never claim. And still, no one suspected a thing. That's the power of routine. When you repeat a lie long enough, it becomes invisible. Like wallpaper, you stop noticing after years of looking at it. But secrets have a way of whispering, and even the best kept ones eventually demand to be heard. Because behind those marble walls and perfect smiles, something was starting to shift. Catherine's laughter didn't sound the same anymore. James's gaze lingered a bit too long. The children, unknowingly, shared traits that didn't quite match their father. And though Michael was still blind to it, those around him could sense it. The tension in the air, the unspoken rhythm that pulsed between two people who shared something forbidden. But like all tragedies, it wasn't the secret itself that destroyed them. It was what happened when the secret finally met the light. Because no matter how carefully you hide the truth, it never dies quietly. It waits, patiently, until the day it decides to burn everything down. Do you believe emotional affairs are just as destructive as physical ones? Or is the real danger in what's left unsaid? Think about that and hold on to it, because what's coming next is the moment everything begins to unravel. Suspicion never walks in loudly. It creeps, slow, quiet, almost polite, like it's knocking on the door of your mind, asking to be let in. For Michael Harrington, it started with small things. Things so subtle, he almost felt foolish for noticing them. James had always been part of the family's rhythm, always in the background but somehow everywhere at once. He knew what the kids wanted for breakfast before they did. He remembered every allergy, every preference, every appointment. And that was normal. It was his job. But lately, there were moments that didn't feel like routine anymore, moments that didn't sit right. Like the day Michael overheard James reminding his daughter about a childhood memory, one he didn't even remember himself. "You were terrified of thunderstorms," James said, with a soft laugh. "You used to hide under the piano and make me sit with you until the rain stopped." Michael smiled at first, thought it was sweet. But later that night, something about it bothered him. Why would James remember it in such detail? How would he even know? Then came the other things, things that didn't add up no matter how he tried to explain them away. The youngest, Sophie, had always been his heart, gentle, artistic, patient. But lately, as she grew older, Michael began to see someone else in her face. A small, crooked smile he couldn't place. Light hazel eyes that skipped generations, or so he thought. Until one day, he caught James laughing with her in the garden, and for the briefest second, their expressions mirrored perfectly. The same tilt of the head, the same mischievous grin. Michael felt something twist inside his chest, a thought too cruel to name. He forced it down, told himself it was nonsense. But once that seed of doubt is planted, it doesn't stop growing. The next few weeks only made it worse. Catherine's phone buzzed constantly. Not unusual. She managed multiple charity boards, social events, endless logistics. But one night, while she was showering, her phone lit up across the room. A message flashed briefly before the screen dimmed. "You handled that perfectly. I'll take care of the rest." Jay, Michael stared at the message for a moment too long. Jay. Of course it could be James, but it could also be Julia from the foundation, or Jonathan from accounting. He wanted to believe that. He needed to believe that. But when Catherine came out, towel wrapped around her hair, and saw him near her phone, her reaction wasn't casual. She froze. "Looking for something?" she asked, trying to sound light, but her voice trembled. Just slightly. Michael smiled, kissed her forehead, and said, "Just checking the time." But inside, the question began to echo louder. And soon, he started seeing things he'd never noticed before. The way James lingered after work, sitting in the den even after his duties were done. The way Catherine's tone softened when she spoke to him. Not professional, not friendly, but familiar. It was the kind of tone you use when you don't have to explain yourself. The kind that lives between two people who already know the ending of the sentence. At family dinners, Michael started watching more closely. He noticed how James's chair always ended up next to Catherine's, how their hands brushed when passing plates, how their laughter came just a little too easily, a little too often. Everyone else seemed oblivious. The kids adored James. Catherine smiled like nothing had changed. But Michael's world, the one built on trust and routine, was starting to warp around the edges. One evening, during a casual dinner with an old friend, the conversation took a turn that left him uneasy. "You and James," his friend said, chuckling. "You're practically co-parents, huh?" Michael laughed. Forced, polite. "Yeah, he's been around forever," he replied. But the words clung to him long after the laughter faded. Co-parents. Why did that feel so accurate? That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments he'd ignored for years. The trips he'd taken, the late nights James stayed behind to help Catherine, the quiet phone calls she took in the other room. Little fragments of memory that once meant nothing now felt like clues in a story he hadn't realized he was part of. But every time suspicion rose, guilt pushed it back down, because doubting them felt like betrayal in itself. Catherine had been his wife for over 2 decades. James had been his right hand, loyal, consistent, always there. These were his people, his family. So he told himself what every betrayed person tells themselves before the fall. "I'm overthinking. I'm tired. I'm imagining things." But deep down, he knew better. Because when something's off in your own home, you feel it. You might not see it or name it, but you sense it in the silence between words, in the way laughter doesn't sound the same anymore. Michael began moving differently after that. Watching, listening. Not paranoid, just aware. And though he didn't know it yet, the truth had already started showing itself in plain sight. Because sometimes, betrayal doesn't hide in the shadows. It stands right beside you, smiling, helpful, familiar. At first, suspicion felt disloyal, but truth doesn't care about loyalty. And Michael was about to learn that the hard way. Truth doesn't shout when it enters your life. It whispers, softly at first, through paper, through ink, through the smallest detail you almost overlook. For Michael Harrington, the truth came dressed as paperwork. It was supposed to be a routine meeting, renewing his life insurance policy, updating estate records, the sort of administrative chore he could do half asleep. His attorney slid a stack of documents across the polished oak desk. "Standard stuff," the man said. "Just need you to confirm beneficiaries, guardianships, all that." Michael flipped through the pages, signing where he was told. But then he paused. Page 12. Guardianship designation. His eyes caught on a name he hadn't expected to see. Porter, James. The line read, "Secondary guardian to minors, approved by spouse, Catherine Harrington." The date below was from years ago, signed in Catherine's elegant cursive. For a second, he thought it was a clerical mistake. Surely it had to be. James? The butler? Why could he, be listed as a legal guardian for their children? He smiled politely, masking the confusion bubbling under his chest. "Looks like there's a small error here," he said lightly, pushing the page back toward his lawyer. "James Porter isn't family, just an employee." The lawyer frowned. Strange. This was filed years ago, directly from Catherine. I assumed he was a relative. Michael nodded, but inside, something began to splinter. He signed the papers, excused himself early, and drove home in silence. That night, after Catherine went to bed, he went through the old file cabinet in his study, the one he rarely opened. It was full of folders labeled neatly in Catherine's handwriting. Medical records, education, household expenses, travel receipts. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe proof that everything was fine. But what he found instead were hospital forms, pediatric records, a bill from a DNA clinic. At first glance, it looked innocent. Routine checkups, vaccinations. But the further he read, the more the words started to blur. The clinic's name matched the one his attorney had mentioned. The billing information listed Catherine's name, and beside it, under consultant of record, was the same name again. Porter, James. His breath caught. His eyes darted across the page, searching for any explanation, any detail that could make it make sense. But there wasn't one. He stared at the papers in disbelief, the realization creeping through him like frost. There were multiple entries, each tied to different years, each linked to one of their children's births. He sank into his chair, the leather creaking beneath him, and whispered to no one, "No, that can't be right." But even as he said it, he knew something was very, very wrong. The next morning, he called the clinic, pretended to be verifying insurance records. The woman on the other end confirmed everything. Dates, billing, signatures, Catherine's name, James Porter's authorization. That was the moment denial stopped working. Over the next week, Michael moved carefully, quietly. He didn't confront Catherine. He didn't confront James. Instead, he started gathering his own evidence. A photograph here, a document there, bank statements that didn't add up, receipts that told stories Catherine had never mentioned. And finally, after days of restless nights and whispered thoughts that made him sick to his stomach, he made a decision. He ordered DNA tests, one for each of his 3 children. He told himself it was for peace of mind, but deep down, he knew peace had already left the room. Weeks passed. Every day, he came home and looked at them, his family, wondering if the life he'd built was still real. The test results arrived on a Tuesday. A plain white envelope. No warning, no mercy. He sat in his study for hours before opening it. The house was quiet. Catherine was out. The children were at school. The only sound was the soft tick of the grandfather clock behind him. He slit the envelope open with trembling hands. The paper inside was short, clinical, devoid of emotion. Probability of paternity, 0%. His breath left him. He turned the page, praying for a misprint, but the next line hit harder than the first. Father identified, Porter, James. The words blurred as tears filled his eyes. He tried to read them again, to make them mean something else, anything else, but they refused to change. 1 test, 2, 3. Each one confirming what he feared most. Not one of those children. The children he'd raised, loved, protected, shared his blood. The same man he'd called brother. The same man he'd trusted to guard his family had stolen it. He leaned back in his chair, clutching the papers like they might dissolve if he let go. His eyes drifted to the framed photos on the shelf. The beach vacations, birthdays, graduation portraits, smiling faces, laughter, love. He had been proud of them all. Now, every image looked like a crime scene. The tears came slowly, not loud, not violent, just quiet streams cutting down his face. "How long?" he whispered. "How long have you been lying to me?" But there was no answer. Only the steady hum of the house that no longer felt like home. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat alone in his study, the DNA papers spread across the desk, the faint light from a single lamp flickering against the walls. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was something deeper. A theft of identity, of legacy, of fatherhood itself. And as the hours passed, the man who had once been defined by patience and reason began to change. His silence hardened into resolve. His grief curdled into rage. Because betrayal, like that, doesn't fade. It festers. It rewrites everything you thought you knew about love, about loyalty, about yourself. And by morning, Michael Harrington wasn't the same man anymore. He was something else, something born from truth and fury. That night, something inside Michael changed forever. When a man breaks, it's rarely loud. It happens in silence, in the quiet between heartbeats, in the hours after everyone's gone to bed. For Michael Harrington, that silence became his new routine. After discovering the truth, he didn't scream. He didn't confront. He didn't even cry again. He simply went still. Catherine noticed a difference. The way his eyes lingered longer. How his smile didn't quite reach his eyes anymore. But she brushed it off. Stress, she thought. Work, maybe. James, ever the loyal helper, didn't notice anything at all. Or maybe he did, and chose not to see it. Because Michael's calm wasn't peace. It was preparation. For weeks, he went through the motions like a man sleepwalking through his own life. He made breakfast, went to work, kissed his wife on the cheek. But every gesture, every word, was part of a performance. The only place the mask slipped was in his study, the same room where he'd opened the DNA results. The papers still sat on his desk, weighed down by a single photograph of his family. Except now, he didn't see a family. He saw a lie with faces. So he began to document it. He bought small, hidden cameras, the kind designed for security systems, not revenge. He told himself it was for proof, for understanding. But deep down, it was for something darker. He installed one in the kitchen clock, another behind the bookshelf in the den, one more above the garage, angled toward the back door, the same door James often used when locking up after work. And then he waited. Days passed. He said good morning. He said good night. He hugged his children, told them he loved them, told Catherine he'd be home late. And at night, after the house fell quiet, he'd sit at his desk, watching. The footage started innocently enough, the usual routines. Catherine cooking, James tidying, laughter echoing faintly from another room. But then came the gestures that told the truth. The casual hand on her shoulder, the shared looks when they thought no one was watching, the closeness that spoke louder than any confession. He paused the video, rewound it, watched again, again, until the line between disbelief and rage blurred into something cold and clear. Each night, he collected more evidence, tiny betrayals captured in 1080p. A glance, a smile, a brush of the hand. Every moment another knife twisting in his chest. He didn't confront her, not yet, because rage can be impulsive, but vengeance is patient. And Michael had learned patience his whole life, in business, in fatherhood, in trust. Now, he was about to apply it to something else. The more he saw, the less he felt. The love that once made him human started dissolving into something mechanical. He stopped laughing at the dinner table, stopped taking calls from friends, stopped sleeping. Instead, he studied. He mapped their schedules. When Catherine went shopping, when James left for errands, when the kids were out of the house, he noticed a pattern. Tuesdays and Thursdays, always the same. Catherine's yoga nights. James's inventory checks. 2 hours, sometimes 3. The same gap every week. And though he'd already seen enough proof, something inside him still needed to feel it, needed to see it with his own eyes before his soul could stop pretending. So, he followed them. He left his car a block away, blending into the dark, watching from a distance as Catherine's SUV pulled into a quiet townhouse complex on the edge of Beverly Glen. Minutes later, James's black sedan arrived. He waited 10 minutes, 15. Lights flicked on inside one of the upstairs windows. Shadows moved behind drawn curtains, close, intertwined. Michael's hands tightened around the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. His breathing slowed. There was no shock left, no disbelief, just confirmation. The nightmare wasn't a mistake. It was real. He drove home in silence, headlights cutting through the rain. Inside, he poured himself a drink. The same brandy he used to celebrate every milestone of his life. Tonight, it tasted like ash. He sat in his study again, staring at the paused footage on his monitor. Catherine laughing at something James said, her hand resting on his arm. He hit delete, then opened another video. Watched, deleted, watched, deleted. Until finally, he opened the folder labeled Family Memories. Christmas morning, 2010. Luke's 8th birthday. Sophie's first recital. He watched each one for the last time. The smiles, the hugs, the moments he once believed were real. Then, one by one, he deleted them all. Gone. Because sometimes closure doesn't come from forgiveness. It comes from erasure. Some betrayals don't explode. They simmer quietly until silence becomes a weapon. And now, Michael's silence was sharper than any blade. His heart had stopped breaking. It was now preparing to strike. If you're still watching, it means you're as gripped by this story as we were researching it. Give this video a thumbs up. It helps Crime Next Door keep uncovering stories most people are too afraid to tell. That night, outside the Harrington mansion, rain began to fall. Soft at first, then steady. And inside, somewhere between guilt, grief, and vengeance, the man who once believed in love was about to decide what came next. Because once a man loses everything he thought was his, there's nothing left to lose. Only reckoning. There's a moment, right before everything breaks, when time feels slower. The air gets heavier, the sounds sharper, and you can almost feel the line between who you were and who you're about to become. For Michael Harrington, that moment came on a quiet Friday night. He wasn't supposed to be home. Catherine thought he was in Palo Alto, meeting investors. James thought he had the weekend off. But that night, for reasons even he couldn't explain, Michael canceled his trip. No calls, no warning, just a decision. It was late when he pulled into the driveway. The house was dim, except for the faint glow of lights spilling from the hallway. He stepped inside. The sound of rain against the windows followed him in, gentle, rhythmic. Then, another sound, laughter, from below. The wine cellar, Catherine's voice, James's voice, soft, familiar. And then, a pause, followed by the kind of silence that doesn't belong to strangers. He froze. His mind tried to reason with what his heart already knew. Maybe they're organizing the cellar. Maybe it's nothing. But deep down, he'd already stopped believing in maybe. He walked slowly toward the basement door. Each step felt like walking toward a truth that had been waiting too long to be found. The closer he got, the clearer their voices became. A whisper here, a laugh there. He reached for the handle, paused, and exhaled. Then he opened the door. The room fell silent. Candlelight flickered across the cellar walls, casting long, trembling shadows. Catherine turned first. Her face pale, lips parted, eyes wide. James froze, his hand still hovering near hers. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the soft crackle of the candle filled the space. Michael's voice broke the silence. Calm. Too calm. How long? Catherine blinked, her throat tightening. Please. It's not what you think. His expression didn't change. His eyes were hollow, searching for something that could still make this make sense. Then whose children are they? Silence. Catherine's breath hitched. James looked down, guilt etched across his face. That was the answer. No words, just silence. And sometimes silence tells you everything you needed to hear. The sound of it was worse than a confession. 23 years of trust, gone. He looked at them both. Two people he had built his life around, his wife, his brother in everything but blood. He'd given them loyalty, protection, love, and they'd given him lies. His voice trembled when he finally spoke again. I trusted you. Catherine tried to move toward him, tears streaming. Michael, please. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. But he stepped back. The candlelight flickered across his face, half fury, half heartbreak. His hand went into his coat pocket, slow, deliberate. The metallic glint of a gun caught the light. Catherine's scream echoed off the stone walls. Michael, don't! But his eyes were distant now, fixed somewhere far away, somewhere no one could reach. James took a step forward. James, Michael, listen to me. This isn't what you think. I think I've been living in a lie for 23 years. The air was thick, heavy, electric. Catherine reached out again, sobbing, pleading. Please, just put it down. We can... 2 shots, close together. The echo thundered through the cellar. Then, silence. The kind of silence that makes your heart forget to beat. Upstairs, a clock chimed 10 times. The rain outside grew heavier, washing down the windows like tears. By the time police arrived, the air was still thick with smoke and silence. The candles had burned low. 2 bodies lay still on the floor. One near the table, one by the wall. And Michael Harrington was gone. His car was found later that night, abandoned near the cliffs above Malibu. The engine still warm, no note, no goodbye. Just emptiness, the echo of a life that had imploded from the inside out. When officers searched the house, they found the hidden cameras, the deleted files, and the DNA papers still spread across his desk. Evidence of a man who'd stopped living long before he pulled the trigger. The next morning, the headlines hit every major outlet. Billionaire tech investor's mansion turns into scene of double homicide. The world called it shocking, tragic, unbelievable. But those who knew him said the same thing in quieter tones. He loved too much. Because sometimes love isn't what keeps you alive. Sometimes it's what burns you down. And in the case of Michael Harrington, it burned everything. When officers arrived at the Harrington mansion, the scene was eerily quiet. Rain still dripped from the roof, pooling along the stone steps. Inside, the air was heavy, a cocktail of gunpowder, wine, and silence. And then they saw him. Michael Harrington, sitting on the front steps in his blood-stained shirt, head bowed, hands trembling, the revolver resting beside him like a confession in metal. His eyes were blank. His voice, almost a whisper. They lied about everything. Those were the only words he spoke before officers moved in. The paramedics rushed inside, but it was too late. Catherine Harrington and James Porter were already gone. 2 lives ended in a matter of seconds. The police report later confirmed what the scene already said out loud. Both victims had been shot at close range. 1 bullet to the chest, 1 to the head, execution style. The forensics told the rest of the story. Gunpowder residue on Michael's hands. His fingerprints on the weapon. The timeline fitting almost too perfectly. But as investigators dug deeper, the simple story of a husband snapping became far more complex. Inside Michael's study, detectives found layers of obsession, folders of evidence, handwritten notes, and recordings documenting his every suspicion. On his computer, hidden camera footage neatly organized by date. On his desk, DNA test results proving beyond doubt that James Porter was the biological father of all three Harrington children. On the floor, beneath the desk, a torn family portrait, Michael's face ripped cleanly down the middle. The mansion that once symbolized love and loyalty had become a museum of betrayal. Detectives pieced it together: the discovery, the surveillance, the confrontation. What they couldn't determine was whether the killings were spontaneous or something he'd planned for weeks. But one clue changed everything. Inside a drawer, they found a leather-bound journal, pages filled with notes written in Michael's precise handwriting. "Truth burns," one entry read, "and tonight it will burn in my house too." The district attorney called it proof of premeditation. His defense team would later call it poetry from a broken man. On a nearby USB drive, detectives uncovered short recordings, Michael narrating his own downfall. "You can forgive an affair," he said in one, "but how do you forgive 23 years of pretending to be a father?" The evidence was overwhelming. Every file, every photo, every word pointed to a man who had seen too much, felt too much, and finally snapped. Local news outlets ran the story before dawn. Prominent Bel Air businessman arrested for double homicide. Billionaire kills wife in Butler after discovering shocking family secret. Reporters gathered at the gates, cameras flashing against the rain. Neighbors stood outside in disbelief. "He was the kindest man," one said. "I just can't believe it." The city was split. Some saw a monster. Others saw a man crushed under the weight of betrayal. Because when a truth that big finally surfaces, there's no way to handle it cleanly. And the question everyone kept asking was the same. Was this a cold-blooded execution, or a man finally breaking under unbearable betrayal? Let's hear your verdict. Was this justice or madness? Comment your take below. The story didn't end at the mansion. It was only beginning. Because what came next wasn't about murder. It was about motive. About whether heartbreak could ever stand on the same ground as homicide. Fade to the courthouse exterior. The rain has stopped, but the storm has only just begun. The trial of Michael Harrington was one of the most watched in California history. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. News anchors dissected every expression, every pause, every sigh. To the media, it was sensational. To the public, it was personal. A man betrayed, a family destroyed, a question of justice hanging in the balance. Inside the courtroom, Michael looked nothing like the man from the headlines. He sat still, dressed in a simple gray suit, face gaunt from sleepless nights. No arrogance, no rage. Just the weight of a man whose world had already ended. The prosecution didn't hesitate. They called it what it was: a deliberate act of revenge. They painted Michael as a man consumed by pride, humiliated by the truth, and determined to take control of it in the most brutal way possible. They showed the jury the DNA papers, the hidden footage, and the journal entries that read like blueprints for murder. One prosecutor's voice echoed through the courtroom. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was preparation. This was intent. He didn't just kill them. He planned to. The defense painted a different picture entirely. They argued that Michael wasn't a killer. He was a casualty of psychological collapse. Temporary insanity, they called it. A man who had suffered betrayal trauma so deep it fractured his sense of identity. What psychologists described as grieving your own death while still alive. Expert witnesses filled the stand. Neurologists, behavioral specialists, trauma counselors, each explaining how chronic deceit can erode a person's perception of reality until their mind breaks. One psychologist described it best. It's not just discovering infidelity. It's discovering that your life, your children, your memories aren't yours. That realization can shatter the psyche completely. The jury listened in silence. Some took notes. Some simply stared at Michael, as if trying to decide whether he looked like a monster or a man. Then came the testimony that no one was ready for. The children. All three, sitting side by side, their voices shaking. They spoke of their father, the man who raised them, who taught them to swim, who tucked them in every night. He was always there for us, said Emma, the eldest. Even after we found out the truth, he was still Dad. The courtroom fell silent. Because that was the paradox no one could untangle. That the man who killed their mother had also been the only real father they'd ever known. Outside the courthouse, the story had already taken on a life of its own. Hashtags trended worldwide. Butler's children, betrayal. Of Bel Air, the Harrington case. Talk shows debated his sanity. Podcasts analyzed his motives. Some called him a narcissist who couldn't handle humiliation. Others called him a victim of emotional homicide, a man killed slowly, over years, by lies. Reporters crowded the courthouse lawn every morning. A father, a husband, a friend. Now, accused murderer, one anchor said on live TV. The narrative kept shifting, from killer to victim, from madness to method. And somewhere in the middle of it all, one truth became clear. This wasn't just a trial about murder. It was a trial about truth, about how much betrayal a person can bear before they become something else entirely. As closing arguments began, the tension was unbearable. The prosecution stood tall. He had choices, they said. He could have walked away, but instead, he chose to destroy. The defense responded quietly. He didn't destroy, ladies and gentlemen. He broke. The courtroom held its breath, because everyone knew the verdict would decide more than one man's fate. It would decide how far love can go before it turns lethal. After 5 months of testimony, the jury returned. The cameras fell silent. 12 faces, 12 hearts carrying the weight of judgment. The foreperson stood. We, the jury, find the defendant. And the world waited to hear what would become of the man who lost everything, including himself, to the truth. The courtroom held its breath as the verdict was read. After months of testimony, debate, and dissection of a man's unraveling mind, the jury had reached a decision. Not first-degree murder. Not premeditated execution, but double manslaughter. The charge was reduced, not out of mercy, but recognition. Recognition that Michael Harrington hadn't killed for greed or control or malice. He had killed from a place beyond reason, a mind fractured by betrayal so deep it warped the edges of his reality. The judge spoke slowly, each word cutting through the air like a final chapter closing. Mr. Harrington, This court finds you guilty of double manslaughter with diminished capacity. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in state prison. The gavel struck. Silence followed. Heavy, absolute. Michael didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He simply turned his head toward the gallery where his 3 children sat, silent, pale, eyes red from days of confusion and grief. And then, with the same calm that had unnerved everyone since his arrest, he said one final thing. No matter what blood says, I'm still your father. The courtroom remained still. Not one camera flash, not one whisper. Just the quiet sobs of 3 children who didn't know which part of love to believe anymore. As guards led him away, Michael didn't look back again. The family mansion in Bel Air was sold within the year. The Harrington name, once synonymous with wealth and legacy, quietly disappeared from the city's social circles. Catherine and James were buried in a joint funeral attended by only a handful of relatives. Their shared headstone bore no mention of the man whose love and rage had ended their story. The newspapers summed it up in 4 words that would haunt the city for years: the Butler's children. That became the name of the tragedy. A phrase whispered like urban legend in high schools, dinner tables, and true crime forums. Some said Michael was a murderer. Others said he was just another victim of deception, of pride, of misplaced trust. But one thing everyone agreed on: no one walked away from that house unscathed. The mansion stood empty for months before being bought by a developer. The walls repainted, the floors replaced, the past buried under fresh marble. But no matter how much polish you put on a place, some stories stain the air itself. And neighbors swear, even now, on quiet nights, when the wind hits just right, you can still hear faint echoes of a man's voice whispering through the halls. They lied about everything. The house changed hands. The name faded. But the question never did. Who was the real victim? Every tragedy leaves behind questions that no verdict can answer. The story of Michael Harrington wasn't just about murder. It was about what happens when truth finally claws its way to the surface. It was about betrayal and blood, about the fragile balance between loyalty and loneliness, about how love, when twisted by secrecy, becomes something dangerous, something that doesn't just hurt the heart, but erases it. Because underneath all the scandal and the courtroom drama, this story asked something timeless. What is family, blood, or devotion? Michael raised 3 children who shared none of his DNA. He loved them, fed them, built their futures. And yet, biology reduced him to a stranger. Was it betrayal that drove him, or heartbreak? And what about Catherine? Was she the villain? Or just a woman starved of affection, finding comfort in the one person who actually saw her? Could that kind of loneliness ever justify the kind of lie that destroyed an entire family? And James, the butler, the friend, the father in secret, did he love her, or was it power? Maybe the affair wasn't just about passion. Maybe it was about proximity, the kind that blurs lines when loyalty and desire live under the same roof too long. Some say the truth should always be told, no matter how ugly. Others say some truths should stay buried, because once you dig them up, there's no putting life back together. If the truth destroys Everything you've built, was it worth knowing? And maybe that's the real tragedy of the Harrington story. Not the gunshots, not the trials, not even the lies, but the fact that love, in its purest form, couldn't survive the truth. Camera lingers on a dusty bookshelf inside the mansion, a family photo half faded, the edges burned by time. In prison, Michael spends his days writing letters he never sends, to the children he still calls his own, each signed the same way, "Love, Dad." His children have never replied, but they still visit once a year, not out of duty, but out of confusion, the kind that never fully heals. Because no matter how far they run, a part of them still remembers the man who raised them. In the end, this story doesn't give answers. It leaves us staring into the same question Michael faced the night his world collapsed. What would you do if the life you built was a lie? What do you think? Was this murder or mercy? Your answer might just divide the comments section. In the end, the truth didn't come from DNA results or courtroom testimonies. It came from devastation. A father betrayed, a family destroyed, a loyalty twisted into something that looked like love until it burned everything it touched. The Harrington tragedy reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't buried in dark alleys or locked rooms. They live in plain sight, behind wedding rings and warm smiles. They sit beside us at the dinner table. They call us family. And when the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't just reveal, it reshapes everything. So before you go, ask yourself one last question. If you discovered your whole life was built on a lie, would you walk away quietly, or would you burn it all to the ground? If this story gripped you, if it made you stop and think about how thin that line really is between trust and tragedy, don't leave without showing your support. Tap that like button, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video to help more people uncover the stories that hide right next door. Because betrayal isn't just a headline, it's a heartbeat, one that echoes long after the truth comes out. This is Crime Next Door, where every secret has a story, and every story hides a secret.